Good evening.
And we are live.
Everybody.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. It is good to see you. I already see the familiar faces, so feel free to turn on your videos, your cameras, and maybe let us know in the chat where you're connecting from so we can actually map the world that is being connected in this one virtual event here, the virtual campfire that we have. And we have Miami, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and it keeps going. Yes. So just a couple of announcements from my part before I give the floor to Lexi and she will kick off the first workshop. Today we meet for 3 hours, so we stay until 9 p.m. Warsaw, Poland time, which is 3 p.m. New York time. And we are planning one 15-minute break around in the middle of the workshop. During the break, please stay connected because at the end of it, you will hear the music, the last 3 minutes of it, so we know exactly when to come back. When it comes to the schedule of today and the handouts for today's workshop, they have been sent to your email already, but just in case so that you have them at hand at all times, we're just putting them on chat again. I see Philip is putting it already. So you have them available at all times. When it comes to forms of practice, during today's workshop, we will have meditation and journaling. We will have a few didactic pieces and plenty of space for answering your questions. We will also have one 12-minute long breakout rooms for sharing. So we highly encourage you to participate in those. If for some reason you cannot participate in these short 12-minute breakout rooms for sharing, please let us know early in the private chat so we have time to set it up accordingly. And in such a case, you will be transferred to a bigger social room with other participants who are not in the breakouts. But we highly recommend that you do join breakouts as well to connect with other people and to make this more interactive. We are recording this workshop, but your video will not be visible in the final version of it because we spotlight our trainer, and we will send you the recording of today's workshop on Tuesday with unlimited access to it. Feel free to ask your questions in two forms: by raising your virtual hand and by typing them on chat. Please keep them short and relevant to the subject, to make the dynamics optimal for covering our fascinating subject that Lexi will be teaching about. There will be spaces for Q&A, and we will be collecting all of them and asking them whenever there is space for it, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible, if not all. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. And now I'm inviting Lexi to begin the first part of our journey together. Enjoy.
Thank you all. Welcome. I'm so happy to see all of you here. So I am Lexi Rothman, and welcome to this workshop series on the integration of internal family systems therapy with Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory. So I'm really excited just looking around, seeing some familiar faces here and many new faces. Just excited to be beginning this journey with so many of you from all over the world on material that means a lot to me, basically. So those of you who've been to one of my IFS workshops in the past, you probably know how passionate I am about the IFS model, how much I enjoy teaching it and sharing it. But the material that I'm going to be presenting in this series is a particular special interest of mine. It's been a special interest of mine for a long time now. And so it means a lot to me to have this opportunity to just share some of my ideas on the ways that these two theories can blend really beautifully together to help us and our clients better understand our biological and our psychological systems so that we can help our clients more safely and effectively. If you haven't trained with me before, I'll just say very briefly, I've been a therapist since 1999. So I've been seeing clients for about 24 years. I spent the first half of my career working integratively with several different therapy models, and then found IFS and have been an IFS person ever since. If you happen to have attended the 1-hour webinar that we did prior to this course, you may have heard me say that when I first started using IFS, I noticed immediately that clients were responding differently in the therapy in a few significant and positive ways. And I also found that I felt more able to do the therapeutic work more safely, particularly with my clients with complex trauma, whose nervous systems would get very frequently and pretty powerfully dysregulated. And I found like I was able to more effectively guide clients toward a place from which they could more effectively heal very deep, long-standing wounds and change very entrenched patterns of thinking and behavior. So I found myself wondering why IFS seemed to be working better than whatever I had used in the past. And in the fall of 2015, this was about 5 years into my IFS journey, I was with this small group of local therapists here in Atlanta, Georgia. And we were in an intensive study group with Kathy Steele, who has a whole lot of expertise in the treatment of dissociation and complex trauma. She introduced us to Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory, and we spent quite a bit of time discussing the theory and discussing its implications for clinical work. And as we were discussing the theory, it dawned on me, rather all of a sudden, one of the reasons why I think IFS is as effective as it is, and it's because IFS works in cooperation or in concert with the nervous system in just these seamless and beautiful ways to promote the healing and the transformation that we're seeing with clients. And I think IFS does this very naturally with the theory and the protocol that was developed by Dick Schwartz, that was refined by Dick and others over the years. So we may not be explicitly talking to our clients about their nervous system when we're working with clients in pure IFS. Doesn't mean we can't talk explicitly about the nervous system, which we'll get to in a future segment of this series. But when we're doing pure IFS, we're actually not talking about the nervous system at all. But IFS in itself is a model that can just naturally flow with the states of the nervous system and work cooperatively rather than fighting against the state that the client is in. I also started noticing how a therapist or a practitioner with just a basic familiarity with polyvagal theory and not having to be an expert in this biological theory, just a basic familiarity with polyvagal theory, and it's the amount of the basic understanding that I'll give you in this course, they could use that basic knowledge about the nervous system to apply their IFS in an even more intentional and strategic way to help their clients better. So this integration of IFS and polyvagal is an ongoing journey for me. I feel like I'm learning new things with every session with my clients about how these theories can work together. So as much as I'm looking forward to sharing, my thoughts, my ideas with you, I'm also really equally excited about us learning from each other in this little community that we have over the next 4 weeks, because each of us has a lot of experience, number one, with our own nervous systems, with our own clients, with the IFS model. Many of you are actually quite experienced as IFS therapists and practitioners. Many of you might already be familiar with polyvagal theory and have it informing your practices already, or work with other therapy models that really are aware of the wisdom of the body, and you work with that. So during our question and answer segments, it's really not just for you to ask me things, although of course you're welcome to do that. But if you'd like to share, if something I say makes you think about something that you do with your clients that you feel is really helpful for them and really effective at moving their nervous systems toward a place where they're more regulated, please feel free to share and we can sort of discuss. So before we dive into the material, I just want to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Richard Schwartz, who is the developer of the IFS model and who has been an unbelievably supportive mentor and friend now for many years, and who has trusted me to share his model and even share my ideas about the model with other people. So I'm very grateful for that. And I also owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Dr. Stephen Porges, who's the developer of the polyvagal theory, and to the brilliant Deb Dana, who is the clinician and the author who translated Stephen Porges's theory into terms that are accessible to those of us who are working with people every day. In therapy settings, we can actually use this material to become more effective at what we do. And if you aren't aware of this yet, Deb Dana is actually also an IFS therapist. So you will hear some of her ideas as well on how these theories can blend together during this course. And I will mention her when it's an idea that I heard from her. So this is just a disclaimer, just saying that as professionals, you're responsible for how you're going to apply the material that we are discussing, making sure you do that according to the standards of your profession. And before we get into our meditation for the day, I just want to talk about the main objective of this series, which is really to illustrate how a basic understanding of polyvagal theory, how can it underlie and support and inform our IFS work? How can it help us implement IFS in a more safe and effective way? And in terms of how we're going to do that over the course of the 4 weeks, I'll talk a bit about the format of the learning that we're going to do so you know what to expect from our time together. So we'll learn in a number of different ways during each session. So we'll begin each day of the course with an IFS-based meditation. And that's, designed to help us, number one, settle into the space, but also as an experiential piece to give you the opportunity during the course to work with your own systems, noticing what's going on with your parts and doing some work with them. And then we'll have time after each meditation for you to journal for just a couple of minutes, anything that your parts want you to take away from the experience. Then we'll have a few minutes in breakout groups so that you can connect with anywhere from 1, 2, or maybe 3 other participants max, and share whatever you're comfortable sharing or whatever you'd like to share about what came up for you in the meditation or how your system's doing today. Then we're going to have didactic segments throughout each of the days, where I will teach you some of the course content, a segment of the course content, and I'll be illustrating those with PowerPoint slides, which you do have a copy of in your course materials. Each week's material will become available to you several days before the presentation so that you can print if you want to. And after every several slides, I might teach for, 15, 20 minutes or so, and then I'll pause so that we can interact around the material. You can ask questions or share if you'd like to. And today, since we're going to be covering a lot of theory today, mostly polyvagal theory, it's going to be more theory heavy today, shifting toward more integration by the end of today and into the applied by the end of the day. And then the next 3 sessions will still have theory, but we'll have more and more and more application and demonstration. So today we will only have those forms of learning: meditation, journaling, small group, didactic, and question and answer. But starting next week, we're going to be adding another channel of learning, which are video examples of my work with 2 real and very different clients. And those videos illustrate everything that I'm going to be teaching you didactically. It's going to show you in a real session, how do we actually integrate IFS and polyvagal theory. So we'll view segments of the videos, and then I'll pause and discuss what you saw in that video in terms of the integration, and specifically, how did polyvagal inform what I was doing, my choice of intervention, and all of that. And I'm not going to be covering introductory IFS concepts because that was sort of a prerequisite for the course, the basics of IFS. I'm going to be mentioning IFS concepts throughout. I just won't be doing teachings on basic IFS. And I'm sure, many of you will have questions as we move through. What I'd like to do in terms of the questions is, when I pause after each didactic segment, to take questions that are relevant to that particular piece of the content. You'll have questions about other things that go beyond what I just covered. And what I would ask is one of 2 things. If they go beyond what we just talked about, to either just put them in the chat and mark them, okay, for later, so that I know that if I don't get to them today, then I collect the chat at the end and I make sure to integrate them into our future learning, or hold them, one or the other. You can put them in the chat, ask them to be addressed later, or just hold them until we hit sort of a segment where we're talking about that. So that'll apply to a lot of the applied questions probably today, because today's theory heavy. So some of the how do you actually do this with clients will be covered in the later weeks. And the only reason I'm asking for that is we have so much material to cover in this course. I just want to make sure we get to all of it. And so that's the only reason why, but I'm hoping to get to all your questions by the end of the series. Okay, so that is everything on logistics. And we can actually go ahead and transition now into the meditation. So if you'd like some privacy for the meditation, feel free to turn off your cameras. And if it feels comfortable for you to participate, and nothing is mandatory here, so just checking in with your system, if it feels okay for you to try this, just go ahead and find a comfortable position as much as possible. And if you'd like to close your eyes, you can do that. And maybe just notice a few breaths. No need to do anything different with your breathing. No need to change it. And start to turn your attention inside. Just gently bringing your awareness to the parts that are active today in your system. So you may notice tired parts, parts that are eager to learn, parts that have feelings about learning some neuroscience or feelings about learning in groups, parts that have concerns about things outside of this workshop today or anything else. And just allow your attention to rest on however these parts are showing up right now. Physiological sensations, emotions, thoughts, images. However it feels right, just let them know you're noticing them all there in the different ways they're present right now. And invite them to notice you too, to see or to sense the you that is not a part. And as they notice you, see how they're reacting to your presence. If they don't seem quite sure of you or open to you in this moment, just stay with them in whatever way they allow, at whatever distance feels right for them. And gently experience whatever degree of connection feels okay for them. And if they do seem receptive to you, ask them if there's anything they need from you in this moment that would allow them to be with you today as you learn, to be by your side if they'd like to be, but to also give you just enough space so that you can be fully present and engaged for the learning. They were able to share with you. Just let them know you're taking in what they need and see if they trust that you're understanding in the way that they need you to. And if not, give them some space to help you understand a bit more, a bit better. So if they feel you understand what they're needing from you in this moment, and if it's something you can provide now, like some presence or breath, love, care, reassurance, go ahead and do that. And if it's something you'll need to do later, just let them know you're getting that. And let them know that in a moment you'll be returning to the room and you'll have a chance to write down anything they want or need you to remember from these moments of connection with them. So give them a chance to tell you, let you know anything they want to be sure you take away from this connection today. And find a way to say goodbye to these parts just for now. And slowly, as you begin to feel ready, you can start to make your way back to the room. If it helps to move around a little or take some deep breaths, you can also do that. And if you'd like to find something to write with and make note of anything that you or your parts wanted you to take away from that experience, anything that feels important to remember. I'll give you a couple minutes for that. Okay. And now we're going to have you go into breakout rooms for 12 minutes so that if you'd like to, you'll have that time to share with 1 to 3 other participants, anything that you feel comfortable sharing about the experience, whether you were able to notice or connect with any parts, if there was something you learned about your system or about the needs of any parts, or about the process of connecting with parts, or if your parts took you on a different journey today, maybe they needed to do that. So whatever feels right to you. So if the breakout rooms are ready, we can go ahead and transition there, and I will see you in 12 minutes. Okay. I think everyone is probably back now. Okay, so hope you had a good experience in the rooms, sharing a little bit. And we're going to move now into our first didactic segment, just introducing a little bit about the polyvagal theory. So the polyvagal theory is a theory that was first presented to the scientific community in the 1990s. I think Stephen Porges had been working on it probably since something around 1969 or so, but first presented to the scientific community in the 1990s by this researcher and professor of psychiatry, Dr. Stephen Porges, whose picture you see here on the right. And he originally assumed that this theory that he was developing would have applications in different medical specialties, obstetrics, neonatology, pediatrics, cardiology, and it does, but what he didn't expect was that his theory would end up being unbelievably relevant to the field of psychotherapy and specifically to the treatment of trauma survivors. And on the left here, you see Deb Dana, who many of you are already probably very familiar with. You may have taken some of her workshops or read her books. She took this very complicated neurobiological theory that Dr. Porges had developed and took these concepts, these phenomena, and translated them into language that's very accessible for clients and for clinicians and practitioners. So she's designed all these strategies and these exercises that help people move their nervous systems out of states of dysregulation into regulation and safety. So Steve and Deb's work help us better understand human biology, how the nervous system can be negatively impacted by trauma or by neglect, and how it can be reshaped in a positive way in therapy. And Deb describes polyvagal theory as the science of feeling safe enough to fall in love with life and take the risks of living, which I love. So as we start this journey of integrating polyvagal theory and IFS, I just want to say something about why we might even want to do this. Why would it be important for us as therapists, as practitioners, to know much of anything about the nervous system? Why is it helpful for us, for our clients, if we have a basic understanding of how the autonomic nervous system is organized and how it functions? And at the bottom of this slide, you see just a few things that clients say that they're coming to therapy to get our help with. So they might be struggling with certain symptoms that are troubling to them, disturbances in their mood, in their sleep, in their executive functioning. They might be having problems in their interpersonal relationships, or struggling with addictive processes, or maybe dealing with stress from a number of different sources. And as Deb Dana says, clients are coming to us with their stories, and they're looking for a safe and supportive place to talk about all of that and learn how to cope with it better. But really, why do they want that? And at the heart of what clients want is to actually feel better, because no matter what the content is for a client that's coming to see us, at the root of that is usually that they're having some trouble regulating their nervous system. So they might be experiencing overwhelming emotions, or very uncomfortable physiological states or sensations, feeling uncomfortable in their own skin, having a lot going on in the body that doesn't feel comfortable for them. And these overwhelming emotional and physical states contribute to them then thinking and behaving in ways that then can lead to more trouble for them, more distress, more discomfort, more problems in their interpersonal relationships and their functioning. So both IFS and polyvagal theory, both of these theories tell us that it's perfectly natural for all of us to get pulled out of regulation frequently. That's just part of being human. That's just a part of living. There's nothing wrong with that. So IFS describes that as we get blended with parts and we temporarily lose some of our access to self, especially if we get blended with parts that are in extreme roles. And polyvagal theory says the same thing in different words. It says we get pulled into and possibly stuck in survival states in our nervous system. But what both theories say is that while it is natural, it's not a problem for us to get pulled out of regulation, even a bunch of times a day. What actually brings suffering for us is when we get pulled out and then stuck in the dysregulation and we have a hard time finding our way back. So in IFS terms, let's say we've got protectors in extreme roles or burdened exiles and they blend with us and we lose some access to our self-energy and we're having a hard time unblending or getting any space from those parts. And we're feeling their feelings pretty strongly and they're leading our systems for us. That has the potential to bring suffering. And in polyvagal terms, when we get pulled into survival states in the nervous system and we can't find our way back to regulation, so we're either flooded with lots of mobilizing energy or we're kind of shut down, numbed, disconnected, and we're stuck in that place and we're trying to live our lives in that condition, that brings suffering, and not just emotional suffering, because what we learn from polyvagal theory is that getting stuck in these survival states is also associated with physical health problems as well. So following up on that question, why should we consider the nervous system in therapy? So first, as we just said, clients are coming to therapy often precisely because their nervous systems are frequently entering these states of dysregulation and they're getting stuck there and they're having a hard time coming back into regulation. So they're suffering. Second, because so much of this process of us getting pulled into dysregulation happens below the level of thinking. It happens without involvement of our cortex. Then, as Bessel van der Kolk says, clients are not able to think their way out of feeling this way. They can't think their way out of trauma responses. So they're being pulled into a survival state in their bodies by these processes that are occurring below the level of their awareness. And they can't just think differently about that and then feel better. So we can translate that to IFS terms and we can say parts are getting activated in us as we move through our daily lives. The parts are then kind of blending with us. And before we know it, we're feeling their feelings. We're seeing the world through their eyes, with their perspectives, their biases, their motivations. And we may even be behaving from that place if they're blended enough. And it can be hard for us to unblend and regain access to self and self-leadership. So if we're only using top-down strategies in therapy, so if we're having our clients talk about issues and try to think differently about what's going on or think differently about themselves even, we can be very limited, in what we might accomplish with them. And that's not really the worst part of it, I think. Because if we try to use interventions that focus just on helping clients think their way out of how they're feeling or think their way into feeling differently about themselves, not only can we encounter a lot of resistance in the therapy, but we can put our clients in a position of feeling shame that they can't make themselves feel better, that they can't do it. It can activate parts that feel shame and then parts that are critical of them for not being able to do it. So I have 3 cats and this is my 3-year-old girl, Athena. I'm Greek, so my cats are sometimes Greek. So she has a habit of inhaling her food. And we found this little reduced speed sign in one of my son's train sets, and we put it next to her bowl. So she turned toward us with this dirty look, so we laughed at her, we took a picture. And as we were just laughing at her, I stopped and I said, oh my gosh, this is exactly why we can't ignore the nervous system when we're doing therapy. And in case it's, kind of hard to see my line of logic there, I'll explain. So this sign is absolutely meaningless to Athena. Putting this warning sign here, telling her how she really should behave, or, if she wants to avoid, stomach pain, or if she wants to avoid being hungry and not having food later on in the day, that's ineffective. The sign's presence, the warning that it carries, will do nothing to impact her behavior. It doesn't reach her in any meaningful way, and it won't change the situation. So the parallel in therapy, to me anyway, is if we're not considering the nervous system and taking the state of the nervous system into account when we're with our clients, and then we're coaching them or advising them or giving them strategies about changing their behaviors or changing the way they think about things or they approach situations, again, we not only risk not getting anywhere, but doing harm in terms of activating the shame held by exiles or activating critical protectors. And when that happens, and we've got the exiles going and the critical protectors going, it actually pushes them further into dysregulation where they're less able to make these changes. So along those lines, polyvagal theory gives us an understanding of how is the autonomic nervous system structured, how does it operate, how can it be reshaped so that our clients will have less frequent, less intense bouts of dysregulation and will be able to come back into regulation more easily. And then IFS gives us a way to use that understanding of the nervous system in this beautiful, compassionate, highly relational, experiential way to bring about the healing and the transformation that polyvagal theory says is possible in the nervous system. So several theorists in the psychotherapy field, they talk about the idea that trauma is not necessarily what happened to us. It's not necessarily the particular event or the series of events that we endured, but rather trauma is the impact of what happened to us, how our internal systems, whether we're talking about our biology or our parts, so how our internal systems have shifted and changed as a result of something that happened to us or as a result of not getting something that we really needed to get. Something like consistent and effective co-regulation from attuned caregivers, during key periods of our development. We really need that. And if we don't get that, there's some impact. So Dr. Porges says, not everybody reacts in the same way to the same type of experience. Two people can experience an event that some outsider might judge as, oh, that's a terrible event. But maybe one of those people might experience profound shifts in how their nervous system operates from there on out. Maybe the other person has some temporary distress, but then returns to their baseline functioning. So he says it's not the event itself or how bad some outsider judges that event to be, but it's what happens to the person's nervous system as the result of experiencing that event. So for many of us, for many of our clients who have experienced traumatic events or enduring patterns of neglect or abandonment or abuse, our autonomic nervous systems might have become retuned such that maybe they don't operate quite the way that they used to anymore, or they never got to operate optimally because maybe we never got initially what we really needed consistently. So now they've been retuned to where they're more likely to support threat reactions inside of us by, noticing cues of danger everywhere and reacting to those cues, and then getting stuck in those uncomfortable, dysregulated states, rather than being as likely to notice and to seek out and to take in and react to cues of safety that might actually shift us back into regulation. So when our nervous systems have been retuned as the result of trauma or neglect, for example, when they've been retuned in such a way that now it's easier for us to move into these adaptive survival states. And now it's easier for us to get stuck in those states. and that's the case for most of our clients, or they wouldn't be paying to come see us, then what we as practitioners, as therapists, what we need to be able to do in our therapies is to move them in a direction where their nervous systems get retuned again, but this time towards safety, toward being able to more quickly and easily move back into regulation when they're pulled out of it, toward actually being in a place where it's harder to knock them out of regulation in the first place because they're so firmly anchored in regulation. So to me, that is the fundamental goal of my therapy with anyone. It's just, no matter what their presenting issues are, no matter what they say they're coming to talk to me about, I'm thinking about that, helping to move them toward that place. And IFS is one powerful therapeutic modality that we can use to bring about that change in how the nervous system is functioning, so that clients can move through the world feeling safer and feeling more regulated and feeling more open for connection and able to experience, some of the joy of living. So we're going to look here at some of the parallels between polyvagal theory and IFS as whole theories. And then over the course of the workshop series, we're going to get down into a lot of specifics. So first, it's important to say that polyvagal theory is not a therapy. It's not a therapeutic orientation like IFS is. Polyvagal theory is a theory about how the autonomic nervous system is structured and how it functions. And I think what's so valuable about that theory, because it's about the human nervous system, is that it can underlie and support any therapy modality. The information that it gives us can help us apply any therapy more safely and effectively, because it helps us understand how our biology works. And that helps us learn how to work cooperatively with our clients' nervous systems, rather than fighting against them, because that's, as Deb Dana says, that's a fight we'll never win. So if we're directing our clients to do something and their nervous system is saying no, their nervous system's going to win every time. So we'll just be left sitting there with our beautiful intervention, useless in that moment. It might have been a great idea, but it's just not going to land. Like that sign with my cat. So whereas polyvagal theory is a neurobiological theory that helps us understand the organization and operation of the autonomic nervous system, IFS is a psychotherapeutic model, and it helps us understand the organization and operation of our psychological system. So both of these theories are non-shaming and non-pathologizing. Polyvagal theory is non-shaming because we're basically telling people, well, yeah, of course you're reacting like this. That's your biology. That's perfectly natural. You react this way because you're human, not because you're defective. And that's the truth. So it gives us this understanding of how are our bodies designed to function. So then we see our responses are just the nervous system doing its job. So that helps us start to let go of all these stories about how we're broken and we're weak and defective and there's something wrong with us, because we find ourselves feeling or reacting in certain ways. And really similarly, in terms of the non-shaming, non-pathologizing piece, IFS helps us understand the way that we're feeling, the way we're thinking and behaving through the lens of multiplicity. So that means we help clients understand it is the nature of the mind to be multiple, to have these different parts that might be in conflict with each other. They might be in alliance with each other, the way members of any community might be, and we help clients understand that their parts took on certain roles in a very natural effort to protect them, to adapt to difficult conditions, to adapt to traumatic experience. And that does not make them messed up, and it does not make them less than, just makes them human. So both of these theories help just strip the judgments, strip the moral meanings off what's happening in our systems. Doesn't mean something bad about us, that our systems have adapted in the ways that they have. It's a natural adaptation and a natural restructuring that human systems undergo to survive, to protect. And I think anyway, that just that sort of orientation toward our systems, just sort of conveying that perspective to our clients, is something that can help parts of them start to release a bit of shame, right up front. Not only release some shame, but also access some respect, some admiration, appreciation and gratitude for the fact that our systems are capable of adapting in whatever ways they need to survive the worst. So the understanding that our biology, that the polyvagal theory gives us, can help us design and implement interventions in our therapies that are safer and more effective, which is what the entire rest of the series is about. And IFS gives us this compassionate and relational way to interact with the parts of our internal systems, which are, interestingly, highly influenced by and capable of strategically making use of our biology. And we will cover that point in detail later in the course, so I won't elaborate here. And finally, both of these theories offer our clients so much hope and possibility. So polyvagal theory helps us see that no matter how our biology has been affected by trauma, we can reshape it back toward flexibility and resilience. That's a possible thing to do. We don't have to stay as stuck in these survival responses forever. And IFS tells us the same thing in different language. We can heal and unburden our wounded and traumatized parts. And when we do that, and then our protectors are able to step down from extreme roles, we restore harmony and balance to our internal systems, which means we have flexibility and choice in how we respond to life rather than just being stuck in a protective and reactive place. So we will pause here to see if there are any questions so far about what we were talking about. I'm just going to stop the share so I can see you all better, because I can only see a handful of you. And I do want to thank some of you. I'm not going to call you out, but some of you have the most exquisite self-energy coming toward me as I'm talking, and I'm looking at you and I see it, and I thank you for that, and I feel it. And also some of you I know, and some of you I've been in your homes before because you've been in video trainings with me, so I feel very comfortable seeing your surroundings again. So if there's anyone so far, I know we're right at the beginning, but if there's anyone so far who has a question or even a comment, if you're someone who has kind of brought knowledge of the nervous system and how states of the nervous system can affect clients, if you've brought that into your work and you want to say something about it, you can. And if not, we'll just transition back. I'll just give you a minute. So let me just check the chat, make sure we don't have anything. Will the transcript be shared? I'm not sure about that. I don't think so. I don't think so, but the workshop recording will be available to watch. So Ben is asking here, I have, let me see, I've gotten some training in polyvagal theory and own the Deb Dana book of exercises for safety and connection. Should I buy her other one, Polyvagal Theory and Therapy? My bias would be yes, just because I've learned so much from each of her books. And sometimes in some of her books, there'll be, of course, a review of some of the same concepts. So, you'll hear some of the same things in different ways. For me, that's actually helpful for me to learn, to hear things presented in different ways, even if I've heard them before. And then there's also some different information in there. So that would just be my personal bias, but I found both of those two books very valuable. I'm feeling so proud for how they've helped me survive. Yes. Oh, that's exactly the point. They deserve to feel exactly that. Marcus, I see your question. Can we talk to the nervous system just as a part? And I'll address something like that a little bit later today. Oh yes, Deb Dana's polyvagal card deck can be very valuable too. I haven't personally gotten that yet. I know that's newer and I need to. So I haven't seen it, but if someone has used it and found it valuable, I'd love to hear more. And Maria, you have a question if you'd like to unmute.
Hi, first of all, thank you. This is just such like on my page work. I'm loving it. Thank you so much. It's interesting because obviously you know Dick very well, and Dick always says that he just can't see images. And I find often with clients, if we get stuck on images, it can get stuck in their cognitive, place in the prefrontal cortex. And I find also with my own therapy, I find it so much easier to go to the body part, the somatic place. And having learned a lot of somatic work and bringing it and blending, sort of bringing it in and integrating it with my own IFS work with.
Your connection went out. Give her a minute and see. She comes back. Okay. Hopefully she'll come back. I will make a little comment on a piece of what she was saying. That for some clients, yes, sometimes if we have, let's say, a lot of focus on something like image or some expectation that they'll see images, for some people it can get them stuck up in a cognitive place, or the idea that they have to, they'll get a part thinking about what image they want to project onto that part. So for people who spontaneously sort of see the images, then that works and they stay in connection and they stay in the flow. But yes, we never want to sort of suggest that they have to be seeing an image or have them try to see the part if it's not just coming. You know, sometimes they will. And at the same time, what I appreciate so much about IFS is that we can work with the parts in whatever ways they show up, whatever channels that they're using, because for some people, it's the opposite. Like they can't work yet with what's going on in the body. Even the word body can be activating for them. They might have a part of them whose job it is to keep them from connecting with or feeling any of the sensations in their body. So if we try to go in initially through the body, they might also get stuck. Like, I can't feel anything there. I don't feel anything. So for clients, sometimes when I'm asking them to notice how or where a part is showing up for them, it's never something that they're feeling in the body at first. Like, I know that their nervous system has shifted state. I know something's going on, of course, there, but they're not allowed to be aware of that as much. So there, it's just so helpful that we can say, okay, then how do you know that this part is active right now? You know, what's letting you know? And they might say, you know, I'm just having images of all the times my partner wasn't there for me, or I'm aware of a bunch of critical thoughts happening right now, judgmental thoughts, you know, so they're not feeling anything in the body, but something has shifted such that now these other channels are active, and that is good enough. They have some indication that the part is there and manifesting in some way. So I love that IFS can welcome and work with the diversity of experience and what is allowed by each of our systems and what is the default for each of our systems. And for Dick, that is not seeing images, you know, and for me, it just depends on the part, whether I get to see it or don't get to see it. So I'm going to go back over here to the.
I'm so sorry,
Alexia.
Oh, yes. Then I will
I'm
wait.
so sorry. I'm in South Africa, so suddenly all the electricity went off, which happens here a lot. So I'm sorry, I'm in the dark now, but
no, please feel free to tell us the rest of what you were saying. I was sort of commenting on some of it, which I hope you'll go back to be able to see the recording, because some of what you said brought up, I think, some valuable.
Yeah, I just was in a nutshell, and I just wanted to hear your response. Is just that I feel that more and more I'm focusing more on what's going on in the body, because of the polyvagal theory and Deb Dana's work, more than focusing on images, because I feel we can get stuck there. That it becomes more academic to me. That's all. And I find that's not for everyone. You know, for some people it is very helpful seeing a color or a shape or an image or an emoji or whatever it is. But I just wondered, if you could respond to that.
I'm going with whatever is coming up for them, whatever is naturally coming up, instead of ever wanting to imply that it should be happening a certain way, or that they need to be seeing an image, or that they need to absolutely be feeling something in the body. Is how are they noticing that part showing up? And sometimes it'll be through one channel or two, and then as they connect more with the part, other channels start to come into their awareness. So maybe they didn't notice anything in the body at first, but now they do. Or maybe they didn't notice an image, they only noticed a shift in their physiological state, or tension in their neck, or heart feeling around their heart, and now they're actually seeing the part. So I'm just open to how it comes, and not to in any way forcing or suggesting it should be one way. And if I do notice that they're they have a part of them that's trying to see an image and that's keeping them up here thinking about it and trying to create it. And what image should I project onto this part? Then we work with that part. We have that part just, see if it can soften back and allow the target part to just be noticed in whatever way it is actually just present and noticeable in that moment. So it's important what you're saying, because parts can show up in many channels, and we want to be open to that and not force anything, and notice when people are getting stuck somewhere. So thank you for that. I'm glad you're back with us. So we'll go into our next little segment here, and then I'll pause for questions again. So let me move you so I can see more of you. Okay, so we talked about the polyvagal theory is related to the structure and the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is a branch of our nervous system that does a lot of different things for us. So it regulates many of our body processes, so including our heartbeat, our breath rhythms, our blood pressure, metabolism, digestion. And it does all of those things automatically. So we don't have to think about digesting our food and just, exert effort to make that happen. It just sort of happens for us, or our heart beating or our breathing just sort of happens for us. So they happen automatically out of our awareness in the background. So the autonomic nervous system is responsible for a lot of vital functions that keep us alive. But I think that as therapists, the thing that to me is most interesting is a totally different function that the autonomic nervous system performs for us, which is that it's constantly, in every moment, scanning and assessing, are we safe or are we in danger right now? All the time it's doing that out of our conscious awareness. So if we look at the basic structure of this system, it's divided into two main branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and then the parasympathetic branch is divided into, it includes two pathways of the vagus nerve, which is our 10th cranial nerve, which is really not just one nerve. It's kind of a family of neural pathways that travels throughout the body. So we've got the ventral vagal pathway and the dorsal vagal pathway. And the dorsal pathway of the vagus nerve, it travels from the brainstem down, and it's mostly receiving a lot of information from, but it's also regulating from our organs that are below the diaphragm that include things like our digestive system. And the ventral pathway goes from the brainstem up through nerves in the neck, the throat, the face, the eyes, the ears. And it also actually travels down from the brainstem to regulate the activity of our heart and lungs. Those are above the diaphragm. So the ventral is regulating the organs above the diaphragm, the dorsal, the ones below, like the digestive system. So you've got messages traveling along these pathways of the vagus nerve, and they're traveling to the brain and then from the brain down. And most of the information is actually traveling from the body up to the brain. So all of this sensory information about how everyone's doing in there is being sent from the body, from these organs up to the brain. And then 20% is motor information and instructions that are coming from the brain down. So these are bidirectional pathways. The information travels in both directions. The dorsal vagal pathway is the most primitive pathway. So it evolved first in our evolutionary history. So it evolved about 500 million years ago. And it helped our reptilian ancestors to survive with its protective strategy, which is immobilization in the face of life-threatening danger, playing dead, basically becoming immobilized. So in addition to all the other vital functions that the dorsal vagal pathway performs for us that keep us alive, it can also perform this survival function for us by shutting us down in the face of overwhelming threat and especially life-threatening danger. And then about 400 million years ago, the sympathetic nervous system was then built on top of that dorsal system. So that is located in the middle of our spinal cord. And instead of immobilizing us and shutting us down the way dorsal does, the sympathetic is a system of mobilization, action, energy. So it can help us survive with its protective strategy of mobilizing us to either fight or to run away, when we're facing danger, fight or flight. It also does other things for us. It helps to shape our heart rhythms and regulate our body temperature and give us energy for things that we need to do. And then finally, the last to develop was the ventral vagal pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. That came online about 200 million years ago. It's only found in mammals. Our reptiles don't have this, for example, and it's a pathway of connection and safety and social engagement. So when that ventral vagal pathway is active, it is capable of regulating or overseeing the activity of sympathetic and dorsal. So that allows those other branches to perform their really important functions like regulating digestion and heartbeat in a regulated way. So this way, when ventral is active and overseeing those branches, we can take care of things we need to do, and we can also rest and experience healing and restoration and growth. We can do both kinds of things. And when ventral is active, we experience good physical health because it helps the dorsal branch regulate our digestive system in a healthy way. It helps the sympathetic regulate our heart rate and our breathing in a healthy way. It's associated with a good immune functioning when we've got ventral activity. So the activity of that ventral vagal branch of the parasympathetic system helps put us in a state where we can adjust to challenges that we face in our lives. We can feel safe enough to connect with other people, and we can give and also receive all the benefits of social connection. So that's how I know, for me, one of the ways I know that I've got some ventral active, or IFS terms, some self on board, is when I can look at you, and if someone's giving me self, I actually receive it and it feels good, and then I can sort of give it back. So that's kind of how I know that I'm online. So polyvagal theory tells us that the autonomic nervous system operates on what are called three organizing principles. Deb Dana refers to these three organizing principles, and they are neuroception, co-regulation, and hierarchy. So the one that we're going to talk about today is neuroception. So neuroception is a term that Stephen Porges invented to describe the way that the autonomic nervous system takes in information. So it relates to that function I was talking about earlier, how the system scans constantly for signs of safety and danger all the time and under the surface of our awareness without us thinking about it, without us being consciously aware that it's even happening, but it's happening all the time. So it's scanning on three levels. It's scanning inside our bodies. So something like, if we have a pain in our stomach, let's say, or like a heart skips a beat, some sort of flutter in our heartbeat, or some sort of tension in our muscles, that can be picked up as a cue of danger from inside our bodies by this system. It's scanning outside in the world around us, so maybe we hear a loud crash in the next room, or maybe there's some low frequency sound from the air conditioning or something in the background. That can be, low frequency sounds can be associated with predators in our evolutionary history. So the nervous system picks up that low frequency sound as a cue of danger. And then it scans between us and other people in our relationships, in our interactions with others. So maybe there's a facial expression or a tone of voice, of a person that we're interacting with that our system can pick up as either a cue of safety that invites us and draws us into regulation and into connection, or can be picked up as a cue of danger that pushes us toward a dysregulated, threatened state. So the fact that the autonomic nervous system is constantly scanning for, picking up, and then reacting in various ways to cues of safety and danger is extremely relevant to therapy. So we'll talk all about that, how it relates to our clients. But it's also important to mention that sometimes the nervous system is then interpreting these cues accurately, and sometimes it's not. So polyvagal theory tells us that as our autonomic nervous system is scanning for cues of safety and danger, it can certainly react to what's objectively present. It can react to the actual cue. And if it's dangerous, it can make us get into protection. If it's safe, it can make us move toward regulation. But our nervous systems also have this really strong tendency to react to familiar cues that kind of remind us of our past experiences. So something that seems like something that, we're familiar with from the past. So let's say we have a client who their mother used to go very silent when the client would express distress. So when they were crying, they were talking about something that was very difficult for them, their mother would just go silent. So for this client, when they would be in distress, their mother would withdraw from them, would disconnect, would become silent. So for this client, when they're in our office and they're feeling distressed and they're expressing distress and we're listening to them very silently, their nervous system might pick up on that cue of silence as a sign of danger because it was dangerous to them. Silence was dangerous to them in the past. Silence meant they were being abandoned. It meant abandonment. So we're listening to them compassionately, actually. We're feeling quite connected to them as they're sharing their distress. And we're not at all withdrawing. We're not at all abandoning, let's say. We're really engaged. But because we aren't speaking, our mouth isn't moving, no sounds are coming out, we're not actively talking to them, their nervous system actually starts to shift into a threatened state. They start to move away from regulation. They start to move out of safety, out of connection. The more silent we are, the more they're moving, and they're moving into protection. So it's important that we honor the fact that even if we're not doing anything, we're not thinking anything negative about the client, we in fact haven't disengaged, we are not abandoning them, we know that maybe, we still need to honor that it's perfectly understandable that our client system might actually interpret and then react to something we're doing as meaning something dangerous for them because it did with somebody else. So that would be one example of what polyvagal theory calls a neuroceptive mismatch. The nervous system is interpreting something as dangerous and reacting to something as a danger when it actually isn't a danger. Our silence actually in that moment is safe. It's, I'm engaged with you, I'm here, I'm present, I can sit with everything you're holding and I could be here with you. That's what it's meaning maybe in our system. But their nervous system is interpreting it as a cue of danger. So when this happens, when there's a mismatch and the nervous system takes in a cue as a threat, as a sign of danger, when it's actually not dangerous, then we can be drawn into a survival response that isn't actually needed in that moment. So then we can behave in ways that may not really fit the situation. We can fight, we can flee, we can shut down in a situation that's actually safe. So I can remember a situation where I was sitting in my office with a client and an emergency vehicle went past the office. And this happens a lot because I'm across the street from a VA hospital. So I didn't even notice it. I don't have a particular sensitivity to sirens. They don't mean that much in my system. So it was in the background for me. But for this particular client I was sitting with, that siren had meaning because that siren had actually meant something dangerous for them in their past. So their nervous system picked up on that cue. They weren't like aware, oh, a siren is going by and now I'm feeling triggered. They didn't have that awareness. The siren was picked up by their system and they immediately became dysregulated without being consciously aware of why. So they became highly anxious, highly agitated. They felt very threatened. They weren't explicitly aware. So all of a sudden they felt in danger. Their nervous system had shifted into a sympathetic survival state where, as Deb Dana says, the story in that state is the world is dangerous, people are dangerous. So they were in this state where they were feeling like the world is dangerous. And I was the only person in the room. I was the only thing in the room. So I became dangerous to them in that moment. They basically felt like, I don't know why, but you're dangerous right now. I don't know why, but I'm getting away from you. So they basically left. They said, I'm leaving. You're dangerous. I don't feel safe with you. I'm gone. And I was literally didn't shift at all. I wasn't doing anything. So they walked out. But fortunately, because we had been doing a lot of IFS work where they had been learning to turn toward activated parts of them and turn toward those parts with some curiosity and get curious with the part about, oh, it's reacting and can it share anything about, all that. So fortunately, when they left my office and went home, they did their own work with what had happened. So they pieced it together through hearing from the part that was actually very scared. I can't take credit for because they did it all on their own, but they were able to come back in and explain that the siren had a meaning of danger for a part of them that had been in a very bad situation related to emergency vehicles. That then made sense to the client. And it was comforting to them that they could put that together, because before that, it was like, what happens? What's wrong with me? Like, I go from being fine to being a mess and running out of my therapy office. I look back and realize you didn't really do anything. So why did I run out like that? I'm crazy, and of course they're not, because when they were able to turn toward the part and hear from it, and the part explain, it was like, oh, okay, that's what's happening. So then we knew from then on, when they were in my office, if an emergency vehicle passed by, I knew to be more alert for that, because it could shift their body into a threatened state, and they might need help unblending from and comforting and being with the part that had been through the trauma until such time as we could heal that part and take them out of trauma time where they were stuck in that scenario with the emergency vehicle. So here we're talking about picking up on a cue and reacting to it as a cue of danger and being pulled into a survival state when we're actually not in danger. And the other type of neuroceptive mismatch that can happen is that we don't pick up on a cue of danger when it is actually there. So for some of our clients who might tend to move through the world in a more blunted or dulled state, or sometimes for highly risk-taking clients, they may not recognize cues of danger when they are present. So then they may not be as likely to be activated into a protective state when actually they do need to be in that moment. So I had a number of young adult clients over the years who were actually being repeatedly sexually assaulted when we were working together. In the first bunch of months of our therapy together, they would come in all the time with additional stories of assault, And what became clear over time is that they were not picking up on cues of danger in certain types of social situations. So they were telling me, what's wrong with me? I feel like a magnet for abuse. Like, why does everyone target me? But of course, there wasn't anything with them. It wasn't like, it was, they had parts who knew how to use dissociation, who had to use dissociative skills to help them survive their childhood. And those parts were using those when they were in these situations. So they were really not as present, not as aware. And as the situation started to turn dangerous, they didn't pick up on those cues, and they stayed in the situation sometimes, and it was not their fault. So other people are aware. They're aware when a situation has started to turn dangerous, but for other reasons, they may not be able to get out of the situation. But here we're talking about a neuroceptive mismatch. The nervous system is not picking up on the cues of danger that are present, doesn't sense them and react to them, So the person is not in the protected state that would help them to mobilize and to get out of the situation. So a lot of times we don't have any awareness that this mismatch is going on. But like my client who ran out of my office, by the time they became aware, it's more the outcome. Like, I just ran out of my therapist's office, and now I actually don't know why I did that. It's nothing clear to me yet about why I did that. Or people will break up with a partner who's been consistently loving. And then they realize at some point, there was really no objective evidence of that person being harmful to them. And maybe the person had been nothing but loving or caring, but their system was picking up something that felt dangerous. I think it's Stephen Porges, I heard him talk about once, and could really relate to this with so many people I've worked with, that sometimes actually cues of safety, like somebody actually being kind or, warm or loving or whatever, and doing it in a safe way, can actually be activating for some people's systems, because it was when they were kind of lured into a safe feeling situation that they were then taken advantage of. So as they start to feel safe with us and their system begins to relax and they begin to experience safety, a sense of safety in the body, that almost becomes a cue of danger for them. And then they end up wanting to leave the relationship. So in polyvagal theory, Dr. Porges, Deb Dana, others, they talk about bringing perception to neuroception, making this implicit under the surface experience of neuroception, making it more explicit. So becoming aware of the fact that the autonomic nervous system is always scanning for and always reacting to cues of safety and danger, paying attention to that as it happens throughout the day, noticing it, naming that, And then when we're aware that we're being pulled out of regulation and pulled into a survival response, then we can learn to bring curiosity to that reaction. And eventually we become able to bring what they talk about, bringing discernment to those moments, to ask ourselves the question in real time, is this reaction that I'm having, is it actually needed for what's really going on right now? And if not, becoming able to adjust accordingly, which they couldn't do before. And how this relates to what we do in IFS therapy, what we can do. In IFS, we have a version of bringing perception to neuroception too. That's when we help our clients learn to notice when parts of them become activated, and then to name that, oh, I'm blended right now. I feel an angry part really close to the surface. It's ready to explode. So they're noticing, they're able to name that. Then we learn how to help them unblend from other parts that are reacting to the target part. So let's say they have a road rage part, like it's really activated. There's probably a part of them that hates the road rage part and is very critical of the road rage part and thinks it shouldn't behave like that. So they learn to unblend from parts that are reacting to the target part so that they can then access curiosity toward the reactive part, toward the road rage part. And then that helps us develop relationships with the parts. And that's how we learn how they're trying to help us, why they're doing what they're doing, what they're afraid would happen if they didn't do it, if they didn't react this way, if they didn't protect us in that way. And of course, that's if the parts that are blending are protectors. If the parts that are blending are exiles, then we form relationships with them in the same way, but since they don't have a job, we're not learning about their protective intention or their role in the system. We're inviting them to just allow us to witness with them whatever they need witnessed about their experience so we can help them heal. So once we start establishing these self-to-part connections, then when something happens out there in the world or something happens inside of us and we pick it up through neuroception, then we're actually less likely to just have a protective survival state activated and more likely to retain an anchor in a regulated place and notice that maybe the flavors of that survival state starting to come up and be able to help anchor more fully in self rather than getting fully hijacked and taken over and blended. So if we have relationships with parts, when they start to blend, we can be with them. We can help them not have to take over. So that means we can get briefly dysregulated and step back into regulation, or briefly pretty blended and then get a foothold back in self or self-leadership. So we can lead our systems from self. One of the qualities that just naturally emerges when we have access to self is perspective. It's one of Dick's 5 Ps of the qualities of the self-led therapist: perspective. Because parts sometimes can't see the forest for the trees. They're looking at situations from their own limited perspective. Those perspectives are biased according to their own factors, their past experience, and all of that. And the parts are then interpreting a situation in light of their own biases. Whereas when the parts unblend and then we have access to self, then we get this bird's eye view of the situation. We can better see and understand all of what's going on and then make more of a choice, have more of a choice about how to respond from a self-led place instead of getting protective and reactive and reacting. So we're going to pause for questions now. And after that, I'll go into some other things because I keep throwing around terms like dysregulation and survival states. So after the questions, we'll go back over into polyvagal theory and get a better understanding of what does that actually mean biologically. So I will stop the share here and take a look. Let me take a look in the chat for a second and just see if there's anything. Okay. Such a good question. Okay. Is there a danger if we focus on safety that suicidal parts will feel exiled? So this is like hugely, hugely important to me. And there's going to be a section of the talk where I talk about this. It's very important in IFS in general, and then to me personally, that we make sure that we apply what we're learning about the nervous system and how that's informing our IFS in a non-exiling way. So there is, an art to that, because yes, we are trying to help clients move toward a place where they're systems are more anchored in biological regulation, because that ends up being a safer and more welcoming environment and a holding environment for all the parts. But we're not trying to say, oh, parts that hold a lot of survival energies or use a lot of survival energies are bad and we want to, you know, suppress them or anything like that. We absolutely want to welcome them. So the thing with polyvagal theory is if we can get a foothold in ventral, a foothold in regulation, or an IFS, if we can get a drop of self accessible, then we can be with very dysregulated parts or parts that bring a lot of survival energies. We can welcome them. They can be there with their energies and all that, but we are with them rather than being sucked into the survival states where then they have no help internally. So now they've fully blended. Our body's in a survival state. Nobody's with them internally. They're alone just out there, you know, and so I really believe there's a both end here. You know, we can be able to move into safety and connection and regulation and be with parts that are holding and using these energies. And it's really not something brilliant on my part. This is what IFS theory has been saying forever. I'm just making the parallels. Dick says self to part relationships are what we want. Self is a regulated, associated with state of regulation. We get a tiny bit of regulation, then we can be with these parts in a way that's actually helpful and healing for them and connecting, rather than when they fully blend and take over, they're kind of isolated and flapping in the breeze out there on their own. So I really appreciate that kind of question, because it speaks to that whole idea of how do we walk this delicate balance between talking about being in a more regulated place and not be exiling to our parts that have every right to be in survival states and bring those energies, and they've saved us with those energies, and we want to welcome and honor them and be with them. And it's really important. So let me see. And Paula, you have a question? And please let me know if I'm mispronouncing names, please.
No, that's perfect. Thanks. Yeah, I just want to go back on the example that you gave about the lady in the office where obviously with her neuroception, she picked up the danger cue of the noise of the sirens.
Yes.
And if she hadn't brought perception to neuroception, because it was interesting that you became the threat, because she hadn't realized it was the siren. So your presence became the threat to her. If she hadn't have had that perception, would you have remained the threat? Would the nervous system have then created a new threat? Is that what we're saying?
It's such an excellent question, because that happened with that client before. There had been something else that was activating for them. I'm trying to remember if it was a scent or there was something else that wasn't me, that put their system into a threat state where I was then seen as the threat. So with the siren example, that happened later. So for the first time, I was seen as the threat, some unrelated cue, had nothing to do with me, but because there was no conscious awareness, they were saying, you feel dangerous to me. So what we did there, and luckily that time they didn't run out with the siren, they ran out. It was such a huge reaction, they ran out. But the time before, when they were saying, like they started just kind of back off like this and get kind of silent, like in the middle of our conversation. And so we noticed that. So I used just pure IFS, just, you know, I know noticing a shift there. It seems like some part of you might have just become activated. You know, what are you noticing? And they were able to say something like, you're feeling dangerous to me right now. I don't trust you. And so I said, okay, you don't have to actually share with me whatever you're about to learn from your system. See if that whatever part is finding me dangerous right now would be willing to share with you about that, you know? And so then they were able to actually get some curiosity. So they weren't going to tell me at first. So my job was just to see if I could get some self in them toward the part and just say, okay, how are you feeling right now toward the part that's reacting? And at first it was just blended. They're like, okay, see if the part would be willing to give you just enough space so that you can hear from them, connect with them, so they can share with you, not with me, because it's not feeling safe to share with me. And so they had to keep looking at me. So they didn't close their eyes and go inside the way they did normally. had to keep looking at me, but they were like having a side conversation here. And the part was able to let them know. And so internally they were talking, and eventually from that internal connecting, it became clear to them that that shift happened, because I asked some sort of question, ask them when that shift happened. Were they feeling all day today that I was dangerous? No, you suddenly felt that. And so they were able to go back, what happened right before that shift to where I suddenly became dangerous? And then they were able to piece something together and realize, oh, okay, so then when they started to realize maybe it wasn't me, then they started to share with me more about what the cue was. And I wish I could remember now. Something's telling me it was some sort of scent or something, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
And then they were able to share with me, and we could work with that part. So because they had had that experience of learning that some cue in the environment could cause reactivity, could cause them to shift into a place where now, parts are feeling that there's danger, and I'm the only one in the room that I'm dangerous. I could be dangerous. That's one possibility. Or I could not be. Then because they had done that is why they were able to go back with the siren example, which was a much stronger dysregulation for them. So they couldn't stay in the room. But yeah, it's a great question. So we would get curious with the part of them that's perceiving us that way. They're welcome to share out loud or just interact privately with the part.
I mean, how much work did you do with polyvagal with them? I find with clients with trauma, I will take some psychoeducation around polyvagal. Do you find you need to do that, or are you literally just keeping that knowledge in your head and sticking with IFS, if you know what I mean? Because
that's
into psychoeducation.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because honestly, I'm really of the there's no one size fits all there with that. So I don't have a standard, like, this is how much psychoed I do with each client to give them a basis with the nervous system. Like for some people, I will not talk nervous system because they're able to go in with the IFS and have such a rich and complex experience. And you'll see one of those clients in one of the videos today, that if I were to stop and psychoeducate, it actually would, Maria was talking more before about situations where we put clients almost in their head, and then they've got parts thinking and analyzing what's going on. And for some clients, it would do that. So for clients like that, I actually use the pure IFS. They end up getting the psychoeducation internally in different ways, and then they just learn about their parts. For other people, it actually creates safety to have that explicit understanding of the shifts that can happen in the body, and then how various parts can be related to all that, which we'll be talking about kind of throughout. You'll get more information on your question throughout.
I've got clients that come in their head and they've got to have the psychoeducation before they trust enough. So look forward to the future there. Thank you.
That's true. Thank you for your question. So we'll let me make sure. Let me apologize, because I think I did my questions before the break and we're supposed to do the break. So let's go on our 15-minute break first, now, or second, and then we'll come back. Okay. So welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your break. I just want to address a question that came in the chat during the break. Allison was asking, how does grief impact the nervous system? I have clients who are so overcome with grief that they can barely function at times. And, it's an important question for various reasons. One is that it sort of allows me to say that with any given phenomenon, and grief would be one example, I'm usually not wanting to give like here's what happens in general every time. With anybody, I'm looking individually for how their systems are reacting. But when I'm seeing something like what you're saying, like with those particular clients, they're so overcome that they can barely function. One possibility that goes through my mind is, are they being drawn down into the state of dorsal survival, which we're going to talk about during this segment. So if that description that I give of the dorsal survival state in the nervous system seems to resonate with you, with what you're noticing in those clients, then it may be that that is for them kind of where the grief is taking them. So as you're listening to this section of the talk, you can see kind of what might seem right about that or not. So we said earlier that the autonomic nervous system has both, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches, and then the parasympathetic branch has these two pathways of the vagus nerve, the dorsal vagal and the ventral vagal. So the ventral vagal pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system becomes active in us, in our bodies, in response to cues of safety, whereas the other pathways, sympathetic and dorsal, become active when there is a neuroception of danger. So when someone is, smiling gently at you, or, making caring eye contact, or when you hear a melodious female voice, for example, this branch of the autonomic nervous system becomes active. And when this branch is active, it supports us feeling socially connected and calm and being in safe engagement with others. So in this state of ventral vagal activation, we can actually notice cues of safety. We can notice and tune into someone smiling at us, which is very hard to do when we're in a survival state, because in a survival state, we're more likely to tune into cues that might indicate that we're actually in danger. So we're much more attuned to those things. So in this state, we can tune into like what our friends are saying to us in conversation, or our clients are saying to us in conversation, rather than being more likely to notice the background noises. So we can be happy and ventral. We don't have to be happy, but we can be active, we can be interested. And, going back to the question that someone was asking before about suicidal parts, which to me also applies to any parts that may be associated with survival energies. When we're in ventral, we don't always have to be calm and happy. When we're anchored in ventral, we actually can be also sad or angry or other things, meaning parts that are feeling angry can be welcome and safe with us. Parts that are feeling sad can be there. Parts that are grieving, parts that are, obsessing about, suicidal, having suicidal ideation, they can be there, because with this anchor in ventral, even if we're feeling all those other feelings, even if we're being flavored by the emotions of all those other parts, we still have a neuroception of safety. We're safe while we're with all of that. We can be safely with all of that. So we don't have to exile or suppress or make any of that go away, as long as we've got this activation in the ventral vagal pathway, or in IFS terms, as long as we've got some access to our self energy. And in polyvagal land, when this ventral vagal pathway is active, it can oversee and it can regulate the activity of the other two branches so that they can perform their functions in a regulated way, like we were talking about before. So I imagine that the ventral vagal pathway is very active when we are embodying self, because this activation allows us to feel maximally connected with others. It allows us to feel compassion. And that's what we can also do when our self-energy is accessible and flowing. But when we don't have significant activity in the ventral vagal pathway, when we don't have that, and then sympathetic or dorsal start to become very active in our bodies, that's when we can enter what are called adaptive survival states in the nervous system, which are states of protection. So Deb Dana emphasizes, when we're talking about the survival states that our nervous system can take us to, it's important to use the word adaptive, to call them adaptive survival states, because these states are adaptive. They have helped us survive, sometimes in unimaginable circumstances. So as an IFS therapist, I actually really appreciate the respect and the honoring that is implied by that term. And also I appreciate the accuracy. They were adaptive, so why not say it? So I want to give some credit to the person who created this wonderful picture. So this picture, I feel it's, to me, so reflective of self-energy, and it's an original work made by an IFS therapist named Rosa in the UK, who is in one of the level 3s that I assisted Dick for, and Rosa agreed to let me use her artwork. So I'm grateful to her for that. So we'll take a look at the survival states that the nervous system can take us to when we neurocept cues of danger. So when we sense a cue of danger, whether it's something we're sensing within our own bodies or out in the environment, or whether we're sensing a cue from a person we're interacting with, what'll happen for us first is that our sympathetic nervous system can start to become increasingly active. And as it gets more and more active, it can eventually trigger the release of adrenaline and cortisol. And if the activation gets significant enough, and we don't have enough ventral going on to oversee what's happening in sympathetic in that moment, then we can enter the sympathetic survival state, which is also known as the fight or flight response. So in that state, we're mobilized to take action in the face of danger. We can fight, or we can run away from whatever's threatening to us. We have the energy to try anyway. So when this system is activated, we have the energy to take some sort of action and at least try to either defend ourselves or try to get to safety. It may not work. We may not be able to. It may not be effective. Sometimes it may not be the wisest strategy, but at least we have the energy to try to do something. So when this system is kind of chronically activated in our clients, that's where we may see things like anxiety, panic attacks, anger, rage, a chaotic type of energy, GI distress. They're hyper alert to cues of danger. They might have a hard time just focusing in social interactions and in conversations and really engaging in an effective way because their nervous system is really, in that point, on high alert for cues of danger and mobilizing them to try to protect themselves. So sympathetic activation when we sense some cues of danger. But if the cues of danger get more numerous or more intense, and we get to the place where we feel totally overwhelmed or helpless to save ourselves, or if we feel like we're in life-threatening danger, then we can move to that even more primitive survival state, which is the state of dorsal vagal shutdown or even collapse. So when the world feels too threatening, there's just too much, we can enter a state of dorsal vagal collapse, and the body enters more of a conservation state there. So there we can feel disconnected and foggy and numb and hopeless, lost, abandoned. We tend not to have the energy to care about much of anything in this state or to function much. So this might be what we were talking about before with grief, that for some people, this is a place they just might go to. It's like a shutdown where they just can't move through the world. They can't really function. They don't have the energy to do it. And the parts that kind of live in the state or associated with the state or experiencing the state, they tell us stories that are characterized by despair, by hopelessness, lack of motivation, lack of caring. So for many of our severely traumatized clients who have faced situations where they couldn't fight or flee from danger, they were trapped, they were helpless in a dangerous situation, then this oldest pathway of the autonomic nervous system might have become very active. And it can still, back then it was necessary for them to survive all that. And still it might become very active in response to present day cues, because it might have helped them out so much that way in the past. It can be a default to where their system goes to when it all becomes too much. So this state kind of pulls us out of conscious awareness. So you may have had a client go into this protective state, even of full collapse in your office. Maybe they're completely shut down. I've had this completely shut down, can't move, can't speak. It's like all the energy has drained from them. And it's like one of my clients, it looked like a robot was powering down, and they would go into this state. And sometimes if the shutdown is extreme enough, the muscle tone in their middle ear will change so that they can't even really comprehend the words that you're saying to them because they're having trouble filtering out the human speech sounds from the background noises. So you're talking to them and they can't really piece that apart. Now that ability comes back online eventually as their system comes back, through sympathetic into some more regulation. Some clients will even fall asleep literally right in the middle of the session if this system becomes activated and literally can just fall right over on the couch, slip out of the chair, And like I said, some of these clients may have had to go to the survival states many times to get through their childhood. It is important for us to know that this state of dorsal collapse is much more difficult for clients to emerge up out of than it is for them to come back to regulation from sympathetic. And we handle it differently in IFS therapy, and we will be talking about that probably in our I think we're going to be talking about working with parts that are hyper-aroused, parts that are hypo-aroused. So the applied piece of it we'll probably do next time on that. So we can be in these dysregulated states, sympathetic survival, dorsal survival. We can also be in a combination state that's called the freeze state. And that adaptive survival state involves a combination of both sympathetic and dorsal energies. So the person is flooded with mobilizing energy from sympathetic, but at the same time, they're immobilized by dorsal. So it's that like scared stiff or deer in the headlights or frozen in terror. It's a highly energized, very rigid state. And usually what happens is they're in that freeze state for a while, and then they're going to tip in one of either direction. They're going to then tip into sympathetic, or they might tip down into dorsal from that freeze place. So in addition to these adaptive survival states, you can also be in regulated states. So regulated states happen when there is activity in the sympathetic and dorsal, but also ventral is active too. And it has enough energy in it to oversee the activity of the other two states. So a regulated state of ventral plus sympathetic could be something like play, where you have enough energy to run around or dance or play a game with somebody, but you also have ventral active. So that means you're in safe social engagement with them. Regulated dorsal is what Deb Dana refers to as stillness. So where the dorsal system is performing its functions like regulating digestion in this peaceful way, but you can basically rest, be safely immobilized, not frozen or collapsed. And that's a very nourishing state. It's a wonderful place to be. And then, of course, you have ventral, where you have a whole lot of ventral vagal activation happening. Sympathetic and dorsal are always running in the background. They have to be to keep us alive. You know, if they stop running, we don't live. But they're not dominant. So we're able to feel safe and connected and engaged with life. And that is what we experience in IFS when our system is self-led in that moment, when we have access to self or a whole lot of access to self, you know, in a given moment. So we'll take, again, a little break for questions and then start to move into the integration of IFS with polyvagal so we can see how everything that we've talked about in a scientific way so far starts to translate into applied into our IFS therapy and how we can help our clients. And I'll also invite you here on this question break, if you'd like to feel free to share examples, you know, either from your own nervous system or what you've seen in your clients, what it has looked like when clients of yours or yourself, either way, have entered adaptive survival states, either very mobilized sympathetic states or more of the shutdown, collapse, low energy, dorsal states. So feel free to share about that if you'd like to, because sometimes it can help to hear from other people's experience what that actually looks like in the room. And I'm going to look about this. Oh, okay. So with a combination freeze state, could you say a little more about ways we can identify this? I often have trouble telling the difference between this and low-level dorsal. It's a good question. For me, it really is, if there seems to be like a lot of energy there, but they can't, you know, for me, it's like a lot of energy, but also can't move, like kind of a stuck, but yet energized. So they still to me look aware and present and like there is a lot of energy there, versus when I start to see the dorsal and it is more of the drained or disconnected or foggy, and there isn't that rigidity in the body and that tension in the body. Ben, you were asking about that. Do you want to say something?
From your demonstration, it seems like intensity is the thing that helps you notice the difference. And that helps. I have a teen that I work with that was my initial experience of her, was in this state. And it is, I mean, it's a perfect combination because she also is slumped over, but her eyes are that deer in the headlights, which is not what I usually see when somebody's totally shut down in dorsal.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Thank you. And thank you for that. See, and Oops. Okay. Oh, Sam?
Hi, do you like being called Lexi? Did I catch that
Yes,
right?
Lexi.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm so enjoying this. Thank you so much. I've been doing one of Deb Dana's 6-month kind of, petty skills and supervision things, and only kind of came to IFS a year ago. So doing a lot of training in that, and it's really lovely to bring the two together. So I think it works really well. You literally just mentioned the kind of ventral plus sympathetic, which I was thinking about earlier in terms of Deb Dana's polyvagal ladder, and how we need to engage a bit of sympathetic energy to get back up the ladder from dorsal to ventral. And I was just wondering how you might sort of see that in terms of parts. And what I wondered just now was, might that be when maybe we're in a dorsal state, but how do we, how would you speak to the kind of sympathetic activation? Is that maybe a kind of healthy state of a playful part, say, that helps us get back into ventral vagal?
So sometimes you'll see.
I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but how can we kind of make use of our parts to bring some of that, good sympathetic energy that helps us get back up to the top of the ladder where the world is safe?
Absolutely. No, it's a great question, and I'll address it briefly here and in more detail later in the course, because some of what Sam's talking about is that the nervous system operates in kind of a hierarchical fashion where we start out in ventral, where we're very regulated, and then when we first get cues of danger, we start to move down into sympathetic, and then when it's too much, we move down into dorsal. So in order to get back to regulation or back to ventral, we actually have to climb back up the same way we went down. So we have to actually bring in some sympathetic energy in order to move up out of dorsal and make our way back to ventral or regulation. We can't jump all the way from the dorsal state to the ventral state of regulation. So the question in terms of if a client is down in dorsal, for example, a bit in that shutdown place, would it be, I hope I'm interpreting this right, but would it be kind of a good thing to have certain parts maybe bring in some playful energy, some sympathetic, a bit of sympathetic energy to help the system come up out of that? And it's a good question, because scientifically, that needs to happen eventually. They can't come up out of dorsal without some of that sympathetic energy coming in. And of course, like we were saying earlier, how are we going to do that in a way that's honoring and not exiling of the part who has had them sink down into dorsal? Because if we are, let's say, and I know you're not saying to do this, but like if we're, intentionally trying to bring in another part to move us up out of there, how will that be experienced by the dorsal part, and what kind of message are we sending to the dorsal part? And yet we also have to do that in order to get self online, to get self to be able to connect with the dorsal part in some way. So all that to say, we will be talking about more of that, and I'm going to show you some of that in a video with one of my clients where she does sink down into dorsal, and where in order to have self to part connection with the dorsal part, we need some sympathetic, because she has to move a little bit up the ladder so that she can be able to connect self to part with the dorsal, and does have a part who brings in a little bit of humor. So it's like a lot of what you're saying like comes into play.
I just think it could be a lovely way to kind of collaborate, between self and parts, and help to maybe even kind of build relationship between different parts to see how they can be more kind of team players, I guess.
And I think that's it. If it's done in the spirit of collaboration with permissions, then it's not exiling. If the dorsal part's like, yeah, actually, I know we need that. I need that sort of help because, I want connection with self. I want to be listened to. I want to be, attended to and cared for and all this. And I know I can't be from self without some more energy in the system. And they're agreeing, and there's a nice collaboration. Okay, rather than us doing it to them, for example, which, like I said, you were not saying. You were talking about this collaborative, like, how can we make this a good thing? So I'm very interested in that. I'm really interested in that, because now, for me, understanding this piece of the science. It's one of the ways for me that polyvagal informs my IFS practice, knowing, well, I can't get them to a self to part connection with a dorsal part with no energy flowing through the system. It's scientifically, we can't do that. We can't like pretend they're not human in a human nervous system right now and just be like, here's self, you know? So there has to be some activation. So I have some ways that I'll talk about later and some actual demonstration of that.
Thank you. I just share something really briefly. It wasn't so much my experience of a client, though I can certainly think of occasions when, you know, I've seen them in this hyper free state. But I actually left a therapist myself earlier this year because I kept experiencing the therapist themselves in this state, which was really blocking. You know, each time this particular, it was a pre-verbal part that I have, would try to come up, then the therapist, maybe because of their own story or whatever, would go into this state.
Yes.
So it was really blocking progress in the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That
feel this kind of the busyness inside in themselves, and yet they would present as very kind of frozen on the outside.
Oh, yes. Well, what you're bringing up now, you're doing such a great job at introducing our topics for later. What you're talking about right now is so important that literally the whole like first half of next week is going to be talking about exactly that. Like our nervous system as the therapist or practitioner has such a giant impact on the state of the client's nervous system, and us knowing that and working with that, it's such a way to make our therapy safer and more effective for our clients, so that they don't either have to suffer unnecessarily in the room, or their parts don't have to feel unwelcome. It makes it harder for us to access self, or they don't have to leave, you know? And so I have to shift back over to the material just because we'll run out of time if not. And I know there are some more questions as well in the chat. So we'll either get to them after this segment, or I'll save them and make sure to come back to them. But those are great though. So to me anyway, this slide feels very important because it really starts our integration journey, and it has a lot of information. It'll take me a little while to talk about just this slide. So I hope that you'll stay with me, kind of try to follow along here. If anything I say is confusing, just submit questions or hold on to them and ask me, because after this slide, I'll pause to see if there are any questions. And on this slide, I'm just going to say a few things about each point, but these are the concepts, or many of them, that I'll be explaining in much more detail over the rest of the course, talking about examples of them and showing video that's relevant to them, so that you'll have multiple ways of actually learning about these things. And so people can start to wonder, basically, and we had a question like that in the chat earlier today, which was great. You know, we're talking about different states of the nervous system from an IFS perspective. Are we saying that parts are just nervous systems, or do we treat the nervous system as a part? You know, and are we saying maybe that when a part blends, maybe that's just us entering a different state of the nervous system, and that's what it is? So I really want to emphasize, at least my strong belief, and I really believe Dick would agree with this, that parts are not states. So we don't want to start thinking about parts as just states of the nervous system, because we might lose then some of the beauty, the power, the effectiveness of IFS. And Dick himself has really always emphasized that we need to understand parts as whole personalities, whole beings. You know, in his No Bad Parts book, he refers to them as sacred spiritual beings. And I think that one of the reasons that IFS works as well as it does, and I think clients feel deeply understood at a level they may never have been before, is because IFS has a respectful and even reverent approach to our parts. So we're inviting them to be known to the client's self and to us, you know, secondarily, but to be known as whole people with their own histories, their preferences, their reasons for doing what they do, reasons for feeling the way they do. So we don't want to reduce our understanding of them to just states of the nervous system. That could be a step backwards. But while they aren't just states, Deb Dana, who again is an IFS therapist, she says, this is something I do agree with, that parts can live in states or they can inhabit certain states of the nervous system. And she says that that means that when those states of the nervous system become active in somebody, like if they shift into sympathetic survival, for example, or they shift into dorsal, their body shifts, that shift opens the door for the parts that live in those states to come out and come online much more easily. And then she goes even further and she says, you know, our parts can blend to various degrees throughout the day. They blend a little bit, they can blend a lot. But she says they can't totally take over and seize control of the system and you know, have us behaving right from that place and speaking right from that blended place, unless the state that the part lives in is active in the nervous system. So if we have a firefighter in our system, let's say, that carries a lot of rage, that would be a part that's associated with the sympathetic survival state, the fight end of the fight or flight, okay? She's saying that that part, you know, is in our system all the time. It's a person, it's alive and well in our system, but it can't hijack us and completely control the system and have us go raging at somebody unless our body has shifted into a state of sympathetic survival where it's no longer regulated by ventral. Or in IFS terms, you know, if self is still online, then that firefighter can be angry, it can be rageful, it can have all its reasons for being upset, but we're not raging at anybody. We're aware of it. It's under the surface. It's right there. We're feeling the anger. We know it's there. We know the part's upset maybe, but we're not totally acting on it because self is still there leading or regulating the system somewhat. Similarly, if ventral is still somewhat active and we're not full out in sympathetic survival, then the part's there. There's some sympathetic activity, but we're not totally blended and acting from that place. So, you know, as you know, one example of this, I guess, clinically. So I have a client who has a part, she identified a part that she called volcano. And volcano is a part of her that holds a lot of anger. And basically what it would do is when she would be feeling stressed or overwhelmed, volcano would direct a lot of anger outward onto her husband. And in her life, that part, volcano, used to take over all the time without warning. So in her past relationships, it would come out all the time and she would be aggressively, you know, verbally aggressive with her partners. But although volcano is a part in her system that chronically now bubbles under the surface, and sometimes it blends slightly, sometimes it flavors her thoughts and her feelings and gives her a taste of that rageful energy, she started in IFS therapy, she started doing some direct connecting work with that part, getting into relationship with volcano. And what she noticed happening as a result of doing that work is that although volcano is still quite chronically active in her system, all the healing has not happened yet, but it very rarely blends with her anymore to the extent that it actually gets in the driver's seat and actually makes her lash out at her husband. It might tempt her to. She's feeling some of that rage. She's having some of the thoughts that go along with volcano and the urge to kind of say those things to him. But it's very rare now that volcano fully blends and that she actually does it. So she wrote this text message to me when we were early on in the work. And she said, volcano is rumbling, boiling, and making noise underneath all the time. It's just waiting for a reason to boil over. The difference now than what was happening before is that I am aware that it's there. I know it's angry. It still influences me, but I find comfort in knowing I don't always blend with it. So there are several things to point out from that message there. You can clearly see from that, what she's saying in the text, the work isn't done with volcano. Volcano is still in an extreme role. It's still protecting unhealed exiles that we hadn't at that point gotten permission to heal. So she was at the beginning stages of working with it, which means there's still a risk of it taking over. But as Deb Dana noted, and we've observed this in our work, it really doesn't take over fully unless her body has shifted into the sympathetic survival state. And that is now happening less overall. So Volcano's still there, still in an extreme role, still can blend, still protecting exiles. We still at that point had to do that work. But because of other IFS work that she had done in the recent past, she got other protectors to step down from extreme roles. She healed other exiles, not even this ones related to Volcano. So she got all this practice accessing her self-energy toward lots of different parts. And her self-energy is more available readily in the system. So therefore, it's just harder for her body to even get to that survival place. It takes more for her to get into sympathetic survival. She can have flavors of sympathetic, but not tip over into survival. So she just doesn't get dysregulated enough anymore for long enough and intensely enough for Volcano to do its thing. It can be there, but it's not hijacking and taking over. So it shows us, and to me, that's very optimistic, because it shows us we don't have to heal every single part in a person's system, before we're seeing changes in how they're moving through the world and in the regulation of their nervous systems and all of that. Any part we work with and heal, anytime we're exercising the neural circuits of connection, which we'll be talking about starting next week, then we're a little harder and a little harder to knock off center. It takes a little more. And it doesn't mean we're exiling those parts. She has tons of interaction with Volcano, way more than she did when it was just taking over and being out there by itself. So something else that feels really important for me to emphasize, because I think we see this really frequently in our IFS sessions, and it's so interesting, is that our parts are capable of making strategic use of our survival states. They can influence our biology if they want to. So they can activate survival states if they decide to. If they think it's warranted, if a part wants to, it can go ahead and bring on a dorsal collapse. So if you're in a session with a client and the two of you are starting to move towards some vulnerability, maybe toward an exile that's stuck in trauma time, and all of a sudden they just slump over and collapse and go into a collapse, for example. It's likely because some part decided, nope, we're not going there. That feels dangerous. Something about where we're going, what's happening in the body as a result of what we're doing is a cue of danger, and I'm taking you out. So that's how we would see it through an IFS lens, that a part decided, no, this feels dangerous and we are not going there. So the entire rest of the day, before the session, after the session, the part didn't feel the need to do that. It did feel the need in that moment to take that person out so that you couldn't do what you were about to do in the session. So if that seems a bit unclear, in the videos that we're going to be watching, you'll see and you'll hear really clear examples of how parts can make intentional and strategic use of survival states, meaning they can use those states on purpose for protective reasons. And they can also make strategic use of regulated states. And I think that they do that when they're in their preferred roles. A lot of protectors in their preferred roles are really just using regulated states of the nervous system. So I think about that with the parts of me that are in preferred roles. So I have, for example, I have a manager part that helps me get work done or do things for my children or clean my house, even when I'm actually tired and I've already had a full day. So this part is in really close relationship with myself, with me. It's overseen and directed by me. So it's not making me stay up till 4 a.m. when that's not what's best for me. We're in collaboration here. So I can basically ask it to lend its resources to the system as needed. So it knows how to help me out by actually bringing on a dose of sympathetic energy without throwing me over into sympathetic survival. So it can bring on a little bit of that energy, but not tip me over. And that's important that I don't get thrown into a survival state, because a lot of what I have to do, and most of us have to do in our work, involves clarity of thought. In survival state, you don't have that clarity of thought. That's a characteristic of being in a regulated state, being somewhat having access to self or ventral. So I need just the amount of sympathetic energy to mobilize me for what I have to accomplish. And this part in its preferred role knows how to help me that way. Whereas before it was healed, absolutely could bring on sympathetic survival, no question, very easily. So parts can also be affected by and react to states of the nervous system. So for my client with the volcano example, the fact that volcano used to take over the system and direct my client's actions, using that sympathetically charged rage, that was unsettling for other parts of the system. They got scared by that. They would react to that. So they were scared of volcano. It made them hopeless that the client would ever be able to have a successful relationship, because it felt like volcano was basically sabotaging relationships. So, she'd rage at her husband, for example, and a few minutes later, when the volcano part unblended, then she'd sink into a dorsal state of hopelessness, because the parts that were reacting to what volcano did would then be in the driver's seat. So all her energy would drain out because she was blended with those parts. And polarized parts, I think, are an example of this sort of idea too. Often there are parts that will bring on a sympathetic survival state strictly in reaction to parts that are using dorsal energy. They feel the client starting to sink down into hopelessness and sink down into despair and loneliness, and they strategically actually bring on a dose of sympathetic survival to push the client into a mobilized place, like an angry place, because maybe that feels safer, so the client doesn't sink into oblivion. And I'll have an example of that later. I think we have one in a video, and I have another example I can share in a future week. The same thing happens the other way. Sometimes there's so much sympathetic activation in someone's system, there's so much anxiety, there's so much panic, that a part will actually strategically bring on a dorsal collapse just to rescue the person from being flooded with all that overwhelm. So this idea is really important when you're dealing with the highly polarized systems that you often see in trauma survivors. And some of these individuals include those who would technically qualify, if you look in the DSM, for a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder, for example. What we're seeing is parts of them using very different survival strategies alternatively. So when you talk to these parts, they often admit that. They acknowledge that they're using those states to counteract the states that are used by other parts. So I had a client diagnosed with bipolar disorder by a psychiatrist, came to me to do IFS work. And when we got curious and got connected with the parts of her that were associated with the more energized manic states, literally these parts admitted, they said that they were actually deliberately bringing on the high energy states to pull her up out of the months of depression and shutdown that she'd experienced. And they would come up and pull her up into this place. Other times parts are themselves affected by states. So let's say you have a lot of dorsal vagal activation in the system. So the person has like chronic low energy, they feel shut down, they feel disconnected a lot of the time. So parts can start to draw conclusions and beliefs from the state that the body is in a lot of the time. And they can say, just aren't the kind of person that has the ability to accomplish what other people can. We're never going to feel good. We're never going to be able to live life like other people can, like our friends do. We're just not that kind of person. So parts can start to take on these burdens on, we're not like this, we're not that. And of course, that way of thinking, which is just in reaction to the physiological state the person is chronically stuck in. But now that the parts are believing that and thinking that and saying that, and other parts are hearing that, it can actually push them further down into disconnection and shutdown. And finally here, parts operate as though they have their own nervous system. So that's how I treat them. I treat them as whole people with their own nervous systems who can operate from a regulated or a dysregulated place. So sometimes at the beginning of a session, you might be with a part who's in a more dysregulated survival energy. But then once you get the part connected with the client's self, then instead of raging like they were, let's say at the beginning of the session, now that same part that's so angry is very calmly talking to self about its concerns, about what it needs to feel okay, about stepping down from its role, why it's doing that job. So we can't just call a part, that's my angry part and feel like we understand it. Maybe it holds a lot of anger. Maybe it strategically uses that anger. But if it didn't have to do that, it would show you it's a lot more than that. So that's also why I say that parts are not states, because then we could have one part for each emotion, let's say, and just be done with it. But in the videos that I'll show you, you'll see so clearly that parts are not states, even if they inhabit those states, even if they experience them, even if they make strategic use of the states. So once they unburden, once they release themselves from extreme roles, if they're protectors, they end up with resilient nervous systems themselves. Then they exist in our system in a very regulated way after that, whereas before they were existing in a survival state. And one last thing that I just think is interesting, a lot of protectors, I don't know if you've heard this from your clients, but once we've kind of worked with the exiles they're protecting, and the protector says, oh, I don't feel like I have to be in this extreme role anymore. I can, step down and do something else. But so many of them will say, yeah, I don't feel like I need to do this job anymore, but I want to reserve my right to use this strategy and use this energy again if I need it to protect. And I love that, because yes, they do reserve that right. Anytime they need to use it, they use it. And the reason they reserve that right, biologically speaking, is the person still lives in a human body with a human nervous system that's designed to protect us in certain ways when it all gets too much. So they will always be able to use those strategies. But the whole point to me, when we're doing the healing and the unburdening and we're helping the system anchor in self, is that now those parts have flexibility and choice about when to bring it, when to bring the survival energies instead of just ending up there chronically and getting stuck there. So I will pause here and stop the share and just see if we have some questions. Yes, TikTok's about diagnosis and no bad parts. Yes. Regarding parts not being states, what do you say to a client who seems to be identifying a part itself as a survivor part? I feel like I'm in constant survivor mode. Oh, so then if I'm understanding the question correctly, what I would then do is help the client connect directly with that part who feels like it's always in survivor mode. And as they, kind of unblend other parts, of course, that are reactive to it. And when they feel some curiosity toward that, they can get a sense from that part. What does that part mean by survivor mode? And the part itself may tell you, because that's exactly to the point of what I was saying in the last point. They have their own nervous system. So the part might itself let the client know that it feels stuck constantly in a certain state. That part feels like it's always stuck, let's say in sympathetic survival, or it's always in dorsal collapse, but maybe it sounds more like a survivor mode, like sympathetic survival. Like I always have to protect, I have to be vigilant, I have to watch out, I have to do things, take care of things, So in getting curious with them, the part can help educate the client's self in terms of what does survivor mode mean. Then you'll be able to see the parallels to the nervous system. Oh, essentially what that part is saying is it's kind of chronically stuck in this survival state itself, because parts have self. So how can we help that part be able to move toward its own place of regulation, its own self-led place? So you'll see that an example in a way of that, maybe not exactly, but close, when next week, when we start one of the videos where we're working with a part of a client who is characterized very much by sympathetic survival energies. And the whole system sees that part as that sort of part, a raging part. And that's how everyone knows that part. And that part, that's where that part goes chronically. And then we get to know it and we see the fullness of it. Oh, this is awesome. My 7-year-old has a volcano part and can now identify when it's about to erupt. Amazing, amazing when we can already help our kids know their systems. Oh, this is really interesting. Carrie, I would actually love to see the reference for this because I don't know this research. So a Norwegian MD writing about polyvagal theory shares that some clients can go from dorsal vagal survival to dorsal vagus resting state. Oh, I would love to to have that reference too. Let me see. Let me see if I have time right now for this. Okay, I'm going to hold the rest of them just because looking at the schedule, I realize we have to finish the very last segment before we run out of time, and then I'll come back. So one of the things that, of course, people often wonder when we mention polyvagal theory and IFS together is then how can we understand self? How can we understand self-energy in terms of the nervous system? And I don't think I or anybody has a totally complete answer to this, but I'll say some thoughts. So I've heard Deb Dana say that self or self-energy is an emergent quality of ventral vagal activation, which means that when our nervous systems are in a place where we have ventral vagal activity going on, then the qualities that emerge from that state are exactly what we see in IFS when someone's parts relax back a bit and open some space for their self-energy to flow. Sorry, I'm just going to change my earphone here. So Deb also mentions curiosity as a hallmark of ventral. Just like in IFS, we mentioned curiosity as the hallmark of the presence of a critical mass of self. We say we need to see at least curiosity to know that the client has at least a critical mass of self on board to go connect with the part. And she cites research that says that compassion is an emergent quality of a flexible, resilient nervous system, and that compassion is biologically based. Polyvagal theory says that we have a home in ventral, and I have very often, and not just me, others as well, have used the term of home for self. So when Dick was developing the IFS model, his clients would talk about parts, and then they would finally get enough of their parts to step back, and they'd all say the same type of thing. This is who I really am. This is myself. IFS, as you may know, is a constraint release model, which means we believe that the self is present and undamaged in everybody, but might be kind of obscured by the energy and the burdens of the parts. So through unblending and then through healing and unburdening the system, we help our clients gain more access to self. And in an identical kind of sentiment, Deb Dana says, ventral is where our nervous system longs to be. Our job is to uncover the pathways that take us back there. So kind of funny to me, one thing I've heard myself say when I'm describing self-energy is that I believe that ventral vagal activity is a necessary condition for accessing self. That has to be happening in our body in order for us to access self. But I feel that maybe self is also more than that. And recently I heard Deb Dana say something similar and different. She says that self is an emergent quality of ventral, but that ventral is more than that. And I think we're probably both talking about the same thing. Each of us is very intimately familiar with, in ourselves, in our clinical work, with what we see, what we feel, what we observe in thousands of hours of interaction when they're, in Deb's case, when they're accessing ventral, in my case, when they access self and they've got that self energy flowing. So we can describe a lot of aspects of that situation. And then there are just some things we just feel that kind of go beyond our ability to put into words and fully describe. And we just understand them energetically or experientially. So I really look forward to the day when we have a lot of research where we're mapping the experience of accessing self and self-energy in these moment-to-moment shifts that are happening in us and our clients. And we have a little bit more information. I don't know it'll ever capture everything. I still think there's some magic to it, but that might just be a part of me. Also, this is a picture of my daughter 4 years ago with one of our kittens on the first day he came home. And I loved the picture because I think it was her self-energy that helped him on his first day home when he was so anxious to just sort of relax and pass out like that. And so when our parts open space and release the constraints for ourself to emerge, and we start to feel this flow of self-energy in our bodies, we might feel some or all of the qualities that are listed on this slide, which has the 8 C's and it has the 5 P's there and a whole bunch of other qualities. And in the blue section of the slide, as a reference for you, you see the common experiences that are described in the polyvagal literature when people have ventral activity, significant ventral activity, and we can see just how similar they are. Curiosity, compassion, the idea that when we're in self or in ventral, we're aware of possibility and options, which is what similar to that idea of perspective and clarity and all of that we talk about having with self in IFS. So we can say also safely engage with others. We can connect. That's the same with self and ventral. So we're either talking about the same thing or we're talking about something very similar. So now that we've sort of laid out those basics of the polyvagal theory, and today I know was very polyvagal heavy, so we can get ourselves prepared to dive much more deeply into the integration of the two models. And in our last few minutes today, we're going to actually start that deeper dive by starting to talk about how IFS either just naturally as part of the traditional protocol, or more intentionally, how does it have us work in ways that are cooperative with the nervous system, or ways that polyvagal theory can help us be more intentional and strategic in applying our IFS. And so I wanted to start with this concept in IFS that we may be very familiar with, some of us at least, but of accessing a critical mass of self. So in IFS therapy, we talk about how important it is to help our clients access at least what we call a critical mass of self before we go too deep with the work, and we define a critical mass of self as the minimum amount of self-energy that needs to be accessible in order to start to form a self-to-part relationship. And that minimum amount is characterized by curiosity. The client needs to at least be showing some curiosity, some interest toward the target part in order for us to be friended and start getting to know it. So they don't have to be all the way to compassion and love for this part and overwhelming appreciation and gratitude to start to form a connection. They just need to have at least curiosity. And very similarly, Deb Dana talks about how important it is for the safety and the effectiveness of the work in therapy to help clients anchor in the ventral vagal state of regulation before they try to work with their survival states. So we're saying the same thing in different terminology. So in IFS therapy, we see, clients come in, maybe they're really blended with parts. And in order to help them work effectively with those parts, we want to try to help see if they can unblend a bit so they can come into connection with the part in question. But sometimes they can't do that at first. They can't get any space. The parts are not okay giving them space, don't feel able to, willing to, whatever it is in that moment. And when that happens, we as therapists, we lend our own self-energy directly to the situation. We allow those parts to directly speak to us, just right through the client. So that's when we're talking about direct access. So sometimes the critical mass of self that we need in the room comes from us. The client can't access any yet. And so someone had asked a question in the chat, which I probably won't answer fully right now, but about what if clients can't even access a drop of self? And that happens. And that's where we have to start with direct access, which is we are bringing our own self-energy, our own ventral to the interaction. So sometimes that critical mass of self in the room is coming from us. Eventually, we want it to be coming from a combination of ourself and the client. And hopefully, eventually, the client's parts will really feel that coming from them primarily. So Deb talks about how she brings her own ventral along when she's working with clients, and she has it available to support the client's regulation as they befriend their survival states. And in IFS, that's the translation is, the self-led presence of the therapist, the self-energy of the therapist, supporting the client's work and supporting their access to their own self-energy. And one of the things that's so important about if we can do it, seeing if we can help clients access even a drop of self-energy, is it gives them then this totally different experience when they then go ahead and work with parts of them that are associated with survival states. So Deb talks about the fact she takes her clients on what she calls autonomic adventures. So she takes them to befriend the different states of their nervous system. And if they've got an anchor in ventral, if they have at least access to curiosity, which is how we know if they have an anchor in ventral, then she says then it makes it possible to go to their sympathetic or their dorsal survival states safely and be with those states instead of getting sucked into those states and stuck there, which is not helpful. It can actually be overwhelming and scary. It's dysregulating. So we see the same thing in IFS. When some clients come to see us, all they've ever experienced is alternating between extreme states. You know, first a protector using sympathetic energy blends with them and they're angry or they're panicked. And then they feel shut down. Someone associated with the dorsal state comes and they're shut down. And that's what you're going to see in the session I start showing you next week. A client who's only alternating between full out sympathetic survival and the free state and then the dorsal state. And he's not having any experiences of self out there on his own when he's coming in for this session. So it's an incredible experience when they can access even the tiniest bit of self-energy and be able to come into relationship with these parts associated with these states instead of just being taken over and controlled by them. And of course, then for those 4 parts, they're alone when they're taking over and controlling, that they're not getting what they need. And both polyvagal theory and IFS tell us if we can anchor in self, if we can anchor in ventral, it makes even the deepest work safe. When we're talking about the safety of the work, we can safely connect with parts using dorsal or sympathetic survival energies as long as we have at least a toehold in the regulated place of having self or ventral oversee that process. And again, we'll see that in the videos. Dr. Porges, in his foreword he wrote to Deb Dana's latest book called Anchored, he says, by establishing a secure anchor within the body, we can safely explore feelings that would previously be destabilizing. So to me, his statement is like a neurobiologically based testament to what IFS has been saying forever, which is having a critical mass of self available makes it safe and possible to witness even the worst traumatic experiences that our parts have been through, because as long as we are with the parts from self rather than blended with them and therefore trapped in the survival states, then it's safe to go to those places and bring healing. So I'm emphasizing this here because this is a cornerstone of the IFS theory and the IFS protocol. But to me, it's one of the ways that really understanding polyvagal theory can help ground us in why is it so important to pay attention to this aspect of the protocol. The protocol talks about building a self-to-part connection before you go and do all kinds of other stuff. And it talks about how important that is. And when you understand this biological reality that if we don't do that, if we don't have an anchor in ventral, and then we try to go work with parts that are stuck in or using these survival states, the client can get sucked right into those states. So understanding that, I think to me, it helps me pay much more attention and be slower and more intentional and take the time I need to get that grounding in a little bit of access to self instead of just moving on to asking questions. And I also say one more thing, it is not a one-time process. It's not like you access a little bit of self in the session and then there's self, available for the rest of the session. You access some self and maybe it's there for a bit and then maybe a part blends and you lose it a little bit and you have to unblend someone else, So we're constantly in awareness of the state of the client's system in that way. And so one of the things we notice that in IFS, and Deb Dana also talks about it when she's working in a polyvagal informed way, is that slower can be faster. So if you do what you need to do, take the time that is needed to help the client access a critical mass of self in their system, could be unblending, could be addressing protectors' concerns so that they can soften back a little bit. If you can do that, the work's going to proceed more smoothly, more safely, with less resistance. So we want to prioritize the development of the self-to-part relationship. And sometimes newer IFS therapists, are kind of having their eye on getting to the point where they can interview the part, like find out from the protector, what is its positive intention and what's its role in the system and how long has it been doing this? How old is it? Or how old does it think the client is? And all the really important information that we eventually get from the protectors. but their eye is on that getting, okay, now we've identified the part, we're with the part, let's move on to that. So this idea of slow down and see, do the unblending you might need to do to get at least curiosity, because then the client is in a neurobiological state that is safer and more for the work to proceed, and the work's going to go better. And then go to all those questions or whatever else you want to do. So take the time you need, and maybe it only takes 10 seconds, but in other systems it won't. Polyvagal perspective, they want us to do the same thing, have clients firmly anchored in ventral before they visit the survival states. So I realize that we are out of time for today. So what I'm going to do is, I know questions have been submitted in the chat. I'm going to save those so that we can make sure to come back to them next time. And this is just last 2 slides so you know where we're going. We're wanting to work toward where we have a self-led system, or in polyvagal terms, a regulated and resilient nervous system. So you'll be able to kind of read on here some description of those. So thank you all for being with us today. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week and getting deeper into the material and addressing the questions that I couldn't get to today. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day or night.
Thank you, Lexi. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to unmute, say bye.
Thanks, Lexi. Bye.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.